Hello, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Today, we're going to do a fast and loose tonalist watercolor landscape painting using a quarter sheet of Legion Stonehenge. This is the cream paper, 90 pound, 100% cotton, and the Ranson hake brush. So the scene's going to be imaginary. I'm going to make it up as I go along. I believe I'm going to pull some images from my mind, but we're just going to have fun. I think I'm going to title it kind of a fun, teasing, clickbait type title. Maybe something like Hacking the Hake brush or something. Just, having fun. I mean, I have a million videos up there with the hake brush already, but maybe do something different. Now, I grabbed a relatively brand new medium hake brush. Here is my one that must be about 5 years old. Because Joe Menza had asked me how long I've had that one for in a previous video. So I think I titled that one simply Painting Only with the Hake Brush. And I think my mother asked me about it as well, because she watches my videos and had said something. So I figured I would switch it up. So some raw sienna going down, grabbing some burnt sienna. The paper's thoroughly saturated. I have a love-hate relationship with this brand of paper, where I absolutely love it, but always something goes wrong with it. Meaning, I had a new order come in, and a storm came through after the order was delivered, and I wasn't home yet from work, and it pushed the entire package onto the yard, the rain off the porch, and the cardboard was soaking wet. However, luckily, with the way Blick packages it, it's cardboard inside cardboard, and it was protected. So I was really worried that all that would have been for nothing. Here's some burnt umber, but fortunately everything worked out. Then when I was putting it in the art room and selecting this piece, just separating it out from the other ones, because I sit mine other papers upright in a thing me and my friend made. I'm gonna grab some yellow ochre for the sky. Hammy climbed onto this piece of paper, of course. That's the first thing he did, and he wrinkled it here, and on the other parts of the sheet. So I'm curious to see what's going to wind up happening. Just starting with a rough piece of paper that's been through those, and seeing if anything kind of mellows out in that regard. Let's grab some ultramarine. For me personally, I really don't clean my brushes throughout the painting process. Maybe if I'm working with a rigger, then we'll start seeing some cleaning happening. But that's mainly because I'm just going back and forth, dipping and getting more water going in and out. Now for me, my maintenance for my hake brushes is after this, I go and I run them underneath the sink, and I don't even know if I wipe them off. I kind of just run them underneath the sink, just kind of get them clean, and then I just sit it upright in a container. I don't think my brush care maintenance routine satisfies a lot of other people's requirements, but there's certain things in regards to painting with how deep you want to go into it. And I mean, if this was a $200 brush, I'm sure I would have a different way of caring for it. Anywho, we have a lot of just different colors down. I really haven't established a horizon line, but we can kind of see that it would be taking place here. I always reference how I use the techniques of the modern tonalist painters, where the oil painters will thin their oil paints out quite a bit, and I'm referring to Stuart Davies, Dennis Sheehan, and others. And they'll wipe on back and forth onto relatively like smooth or very smooth surfaces. It just allows for wiping back and forth. With watercolor, with wet and wet, you can essentially do the same thing. And you can see here I'm taking a paper towel and just moving the pattern along of that paper towel and lifting out clouds and textures in this sky. I always use the shop rag towels. These are the blue towels that you get in the automotive section of a hardware store or something like that. For me, it's always been good for crafts. And I think I've mentioned this before. One day I'd mentioned it to my friend Kylie, and she's like, you know what, that's what my family always buys me as like gifts because of her crafting and what she uses. I'm going to do something a little different. Ultramarine and burnt sienna. Usually I'll do the light red oxide with this mix for my background. And you can see how it's not thoroughly mixed on the hake brush itself. So we naturally get a variation within that. So loading the hake brush in a variety of ways is a very easy trick to jump on board with. And since I prefer to paint wet and wet, and really feed different things in and play around. Let me see, how do I want my foreground to come towards us? Maybe come in here and then another swipe. I was at my buddy Bill's yesterday, and they have a pond in the middle of their yard, and looking to the west yesterday as the sun was setting, we were on this side of the landmass. There was the water, another piece of land, cane field and forest back there. So maybe I'm going to draw from that idea in my mind. Being this is the cream colored paper, cream toned, that's the lightest we're going to probably get with our pulling back. I think I want to put in an idea of the background trees a little bit more. Grabbing some Payne's gray with some raw sienna. None of the paint is fresh on the palette currently. I had spritzed it with some water to get things going. But on the other side of the coulee, which is like a little canal, is a forested area with a cane field area. And I think that's what I'm going to pull in my mind in the opening between the two groups of trees. Now with this super fresh hake brush, we're going to have shedding take place. There's different ways to de-shed. I mentioned the tonalist painters earlier, and Stuart Davies puts a lot of videos out. He uses a chip brush from hardware stores with oils, and I believe his technique was literally just wiping and grabbing and pulling. With watercolor brushes, you can grab them and pull them out as you go. You can also, that's probably the best thing to do, is just kind of pull them and grab them as you go, and then they'll settle down over time. had harvested one of the animals from his farm, and we were cleaning some of the aspects of it, and without going into detail or anything like that, but some of the animals on his farm, he has some goats, and I was telling him, like, they make brushes out of goat hair. I think that's what the hake brush is, goat hair. Out of weasel. This is burnt sienna in here. Out of, I think squirrel, like the blue squirrel from, is it Russian blue squirrel? I don't know. Anyway, throwing a little bit more ultramarine in here. I'm going to layer this forward. This is where I'm pulling away from the scene in my mind from what I saw, and I'm creating a effect of coming forward. Anyway, being that he has goats, and I mentioned that, I was like, maybe we can, ethically harvest some goat hair and maybe make a brush. And he said, yeah, we could just give him a little trim. We did not do that yet, but I think that might be worth experimenting with. There's a gentleman that I mentioned on here, Mr. Mark. He comments in the comments, and he sometimes uses Mr. Mega as his handle, mixing a bit darker with some Payne's Gray. And he has made some homemade brushes. He's made them, I know, focusing more on the handle and the handle material out of different tools for scraping, and out of aged apple wood. I think it's 120 something year old apple wood that he's used, and I'm hoping one day I can get my hands on one of those brushes, but I'm not certain how he goes about making the hairs themselves, like where he is harvesting that, or how he's putting that together. So I'm gonna have to ask him that. I know he did wrap one with wire. I think it was silver wire, wrapped like a quill brush is. And this must be like a copper wire or something. It's probably treated with something since it hasn't turned green. Anywho, so a lot of just behind the scene things, thoughts going on. Mixing some raw umber and a few things that I need to point out so you can see what's happening and taking place. With the watery area, I was creating horizontal strokes. With my trees, I'm looking at more vertical strokes, and I'm just using that simple technique in order to allow the viewer to see the different planes that are taking place, upright versus horizontal. And we could do the broad strokes, or we could simply use it on its side for a very, very thin line. The very fresh hake brush is capable of very straight edges and very narrow. I would probably equate this to a number 4 rigger when it's wet. Some people do some great work with the rigger in this side motion with a little pull to create birch trees and get that amazing texture, that birch bark effect. Let's grab some Payne's Gray. This pure white right here is kind of standing out. Unfortunately, I would prefer to have it in this area, that pure white of the paper. Now, just to point out, I can still see the crease where Hammy had stepped on it. There was another crease here, but I can't see it. We do have a few hairs. They get a little wild and a few that made them way into the painting. But I am fine with that. Some burnt umber and some lamp black, just for a easy go-to dark. I'd say this approach is probably what was most common for me when I was watching a lot of David Usher. He wasn't going as wet and wet as this. Him and a lot of the other fast and loose gentlemen and lady painters will either do a quick dry off after like an initial wash and then play after that, or will apply in a fashion that is not really covering the whole paper, and they get the a lot of sparkling whites coming through it. In fact, I was watching a video of Herman Peckel the other day, and he was creating a wash from the bottom up to his horizon line, and as he got to the top there was less water, and he was just letting that sparkle show through on the top of that. I'm painting to the edges just because it really helps create the whole scene for me. You can see there's no dry-offs that have happened. We're probably about 14 minutes into the painting. Let me check, 17 minutes. And feeding wet and wet, just creating my vertical structures. We're drier up in this sky region, so we get a little bit of a change there, but it gives the effect of a mist hanging low. I'll bring some of these guys down. Grab some burnt sienna, some raw sienna. Let's bring some higher trees off to the side, and let's see how we can create just a little bit of different texture and foliage for these upper portions. Now, my usual brush that I use, same brand, just well worn, would give me great texture for that. If you kind of frazzle it up, a new one, we can get a more frazzled texture. It just takes that little bit of extra effort to actually do that to the brush itself. Then as you start getting these wild clumps coming out, if you want to just use the hake brush, we can play around and create little branch effects in there with that. Oddly enough, I mentioned Herman Peckel, and in his video I was surprised to see him using what was it, a fan brush for that effect. And it shouldn't have surprised me, because I've seen a gentleman on Instagram, and the moment I mentioned, oh, the guy on the Instagram with the hake, not the hake, the fan brush, Joe Menza knows the name immediately. I just never remember it. I think it starts with a T. Hey, Percy Poo. But I'm amazed at what people are capable of creating with the fan brush. Herman Peckel, very loose and textured, while the gentleman on Instagram who does these small plein air ones, I think he uses gouache, creates almost kind of like a pixelated type scene. I'm using the same pigment load and saturation that I used in the foreground right here, but I'm using it to a smaller extent. Since the same tone and color is taking place in the midground and the foreground, I'm making my foreground larger to help keep the sense of depth happening. Feeding in some yellow ochre. Little clumps. You can use scraping tools, you can use your fingernails, you can use the back of the brush itself. I am fine in the foreground pushing it around, especially if you have heavy pigment loads. You can really move it into some interesting patterns very easily. The few negatives to this is whenever you're scraping wet and wet, if you're doing a scraping that damages the paper, which is fine, it doesn't matter if you damage the paper or not, but it does have a drying effect to being darker than the area around it. And if I was to do this in the background, it would just be too dark in contrast to what's alongside it whenever it dries. So it's just something to be aware of. The other thing is if you use your brush to flatten your paper in the corners like I do, once you start having pigment on the end of the brush, you can start making spots in those areas. It might add an interesting effect, but it might be something like that frustrates you at first whenever that starts happening. But you can see where we could just grab some of that pigment that's there and just pull it up above. And pulling that in front of that white area just helps with more sense of depth. So I know that I said that this scene was going to be from my imagination, and it is. All it started with was just a little idea of a little gap between two trees and a little bit of water based off of a scene that I saw at my friend's. Everything else is completely different. So it's kind of the inside of a swamp. Oh, speaking of swamps. So I had posted some Louisiana swamp paintings on Etsy, and people liked them and started picking them up. So I have the Etsy down below if you're ever interested in any of my artwork. And I try to include a free painting, a free gift in my sales. So if you ever buy anything, I'll throw extra stuff in for you. And that goes back into art supplies and just helps support the channel. Grab some lamp black. And the Patreon itself, which I have linked down below, thank you to everybody that supports there. It, once again, just helps putting money back into these projects and experiments and these paintings. And of course, you're always welcome to follow along. You're always welcome to sign your own name. You guys have my express permission to do that. You have my express permission to sell anything you do when you follow one of my videos. I want you guys to be successful, have fun, and have money for art supplies. And if you do follow along, tag me on Instagram or on Facebook, Andrew Broussard Watercolors. I would love to see what you did. Let's bring that up here, kind of push that back. Let's do a dry off, see where we're at. Alright, so that's exactly 25 minutes. Some areas feel a little cool. We did have a little bit of softening taking place. You can leave it the way it is at this point, or you can progress further with playing with the hake brush and doing a second layer on top, or incorporating the rigger. I think I'm going to end this one here, and I'm going to start a second video that'll be a Patreon exclusive. I think I might do a second layer on top just to kind of fiddle around with some stuff. But that being said, you can see hopefully that a lot can be done with one brush, and you can get a lot of different textures, a lot of different effects. And that was just in a wet and wet stage. That's not even looking at dry brush effects over that. I mean, we inadvertently started getting a little bit of dry brush effects, but it gives you the idea of how far you can go with just one brush. I hope you enjoyed. Please like, subscribe, follow, and I will see you all soon. Take care. Have a good day.